Far beneath the sunlit surface of the Caribbean Sea, where blue drifts into darkness and time itself seems to dissolve, lie shapes that defy explanation. 2,000 feet below the waves, off the western coast of Cuba, sonar scanners once drew ghostly outlines across the ocean floor, lines too straight, angles too deliberate, patterns that seemed almost architectural. It was as if a forgotten city had been frozen in silence, entombed in water since the dawn of memory. The sonar images revealed enormous structures, massive cubes, rectangles, and geometric forms resting on the seabed in eerie symmetry. Some resembled pyramids, others resembled roads that seemed to lead nowhere but the deep. The ocean current brushed over them as gently as wind through ruins, whispering secrets from a world that might have existed long before ours. The thought itself was enough to keep explorers awake with wonder, long after the expedition lights had faded from the water's surface. To some, this discovery felt like the turning of a page in humanity's oldest forgotten chapter. What if, thousands of years before our known civilizations, before the rise of Egypt, or Sumer, or even the carving of Stonehenge, there had been another people, an ancient, advanced civilization swallowed whole by rising seas? What if the ocean had become their tomb, and what we found on sonar was their final monument to existence? The waters off Cuba are calm now, their waves gentle, their shallows turquoise and serene. Yet beneath that calm, beyond the reach of sunlight, the earth tells a different story. There, in the pressure and silence, the language of stone begins where human records end. The smooth edges, right angles, and towering formations suggest purpose, intelligence, and design, an echo of the impossible. And deep down, the question lingers like a heartbeat beneath the current: who built them? Those first sonar recordings inspired both awe and skepticism. A Canadian research team, testing mapping equipment, stumbled across the site in the early 2000s. They had expected to find little more than oceanic ridges and geological folds, but what returned to their screens looked alarmingly intentional. Massive stone-like blocks formed patterns, their shadows traced in high resolution, their scale unequaled by any natural formations known in those waters. The discovery was so extreme, so unlikely, that for many, it blurred the fragile border between science and legend. Experts debated. Some called it nothing more than the tricks of sonar echoes bouncing off naturally fractured rock. Others whispered the unthinkable, that this could be evidence of a lost civilization, sunken long before written history, perhaps a remnant of the world destroyed by the great flood spoken of in myth and scripture. The more one looked at the images, the harder it became to dismiss that mysterious geometry. In the stillness of the abyss, those forms waited, stubborn and silent, as if daring us to listen more closely. The ocean, vast and unknowable, keeps its secrets with patience older than the continents themselves. Every wave that laps the Cuban shore carries memory, fragments of stories erased by time. When the last ice age ended some 12,000 years ago, massive quantities of water rushed into the seas, swallowing coastal regions once inhabited by human ancestors. Entire landscapes disappeared below the deep. Could the structures found off Cuba be remnants of those drowned worlds preserved beneath layers of silt and myth? Imagine standing on the deck of a research vessel, the sea around you endless, gentle, darkening toward evening. The sonar hums from the open hatch, its echoes traveling thousands of feet below, bouncing back from solid forms unknown. As the screens flicker, what appears are patterns no natural force could easily carve: squares upon squares, roads, terraces, walls stretching far across the seabed. For a moment, silence covers the ship. The crew looks closer, and the line between imagination and discovery blurs. There is a strange calm in such wonder. The farther humans reach into the ocean, the more we realize how much has been lost, and how little we understand. Beneath the noise of modern cities and artificial lights, another civilization might sleep, older than language, preserved in quiet stone. Each sonar image a shadow, a whisper, a sign that maybe our story began differently than we think. As the waves rise and fall against the hull, one can almost picture it, a city once standing under the Caribbean sky, sunlight reflecting off white stone walls, the laughter of people echoing through plazas, a harbor alive with trade and music. Then, slowly, the sea claiming it back year by year, tide by tide until only silence remained. The city sank, its temples and pyramids buried in darkness, its history erased except for the faint traces now returning through sonar beams. Sleep comes easy when one listens to the rhythm of the sea, but beneath that rhythm lies the pulse of mystery. Some say these structures are proof that Atlantis was real, others believe they mark an even older human chapter, one not yet written in our textbooks. What matters is not how certain we are, but how deeply these mysteries move us, the way they spark imagination, dissolving boundaries between science and myth. Each time the sonar scans the deep again, it's like lighting a candle inside the ocean's cathedral. The beams travel through the black water, over ridges and slopes, and then touch stone. The return signal glows faintly, mapping out corners of another world. In that flicker of reflected sound, you can almost feel humanity listening to its own forgotten heartbeat. The sea stirs, as if aware of being watched. Even now, with all our satellites above and submarines below, most of the ocean floor remains unexplored. It's comforting, in a way, to know that enormous secrets might still rest out there, untouched and unseen. The human need to explore, to connect pieces of our beginnings, remains as deep as the trenches that hold these megaliths. What waits down there could either rewrite everything or remain a beautiful riddle forever. Close your eyes and imagine sinking through endless blue. Light fades. Sound becomes a slow hum. The pressure rises, and the world grows still. Then, out of the darkness, shapes emerge, sharp edges, perfect lines, monolithic silhouettes stretching across the seabed. You drift over them, weightless, watching a ghostly map from a forgotten age. Somewhere in that silence, the ancient world breathes again. That's where our story begins, not on dry land, but beneath 2,000 feet of ocean, in a place where memory sleeps and stone still remembers. Whether born of nature or crafted by hands long gone, these submerged monuments remind us of something profound. The world we know is but a small island in the sea of time, surrounded by mysteries still waiting to surface. The warm Caribbean waters stretch outward like an endless dream, glimmering with a deceptive calm that hides millennia of change beneath its waves. Where the Gulf Stream begins to twist between Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula, the seafloor dips sharply, falling into a vast trench known for its unpredictable currents and mesmerizing silence. It is here, almost directly under the migratory path of ancient storms and drifting sands, that sonar first captured the shapes that would ignite one of the great enigmas of the modern age. Scientists aboard the research vessel that made the initial discovery spoke afterward of a strange stillness that followed the moment the sonar traced the first perfect angles. One researcher, eyes fixed on the monitor, whispered that it looked like a street map. Another laughed nervously, unwilling to believe that geometry of such clarity could be drawn in the wilderness of the deep. The laughter faded as lines turned into corridors, and the corridors into possible monuments, each one revealing a startling pattern that echoed human design. The Cuban coastline itself holds a long memory of tremors, eruptions, and rising tides. Millions of years of shifting tectonic plates have sculpted its underworld into a complexity few places on Earth can match. Just beneath the calm turquoise of its shallows lie sinkholes that drop without warning, underwater caverns where ancient air still breathes, and limestone ridges carved by ages of pressure. In this landscape of hidden depth, the concept of a city lost beneath the sea does not feel entirely impossible. When sonar imaging revealed the first unmistakable geometric forms, the team cross-referenced them with geological charts. The readings didn't match any known natural combinations of ridges or fault lines. They compared the dimensions, right angles, structures rising vertically from the seabed, a grid-like arrangement too ordered to be random. The formation spanned several square kilometers, forming what seemed like the outline of an urban complex: streets, plazas, and pyramidal silhouettes half buried in sediment. The mind hesitates between awe and skepticism in such moments, torn between the rational and the mythical. To understand what could lie there, we must look back to a world that existed before memory. 12,000 years ago, the last ice age was coming to its end. Sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, coastlines extended farther than we can now imagine. Lands now drowned were once wide stretches of fertile earth and forest. It was in this world of ice and meltwater that humanity's earliest legends began, the stories that speak of great floods, of kingdoms swallowed by the oceans, of gods who punished humanity through the rising waters. Perhaps these myths are testimonies carried through millennia by generations who truly witnessed their lands vanish beneath the waves. Cuba's underwater formations rest at a depth that would have been dry land if sea levels were significantly lower. Some geologists propose that if an ancient society indeed existed there, it might have thrived during that transitional era when coastlines were redrawn each century by melting glacier. Others argue that tectonic shifts may have caused sudden collapses of landmasses, dragging entire settlements into the abyss. Such occurrences are rare, but not impossible. Earth's crust, restless and unforgiving, remembers these convulsions well. Out on the open sea, sonar sends out rhythmic pulses that echo through the water like a heartbeat reaching into darkness. Each reflection, each returning vibration, paints a fragment of the unseen landscape below. Over days and nights of mapping, researchers began to perceive not chaos, but order and architecture that seemed deliberate. The more images they gathered, the clearer the pattern became. The presence of what looked like flat-topped pyramids and adjacent rectangular platforms suggested not proved, but suggested that intelligent design had once been at play. Later computer processing gave depth to the images, revealing the contours in three-dimensional projections. On screens, glowing with blue and gold, the seabed looked alive with the outline of an ancient metropolis. Could it be that humans, long before written history, possessed the knowledge to build massive stone structures? Could an entire civilization have thrived along now-forgotten shorelines, only to watch their creation sink as the ocean rose? The mind grapples with these questions like a diver fighting the current pushed between faith, curiosity, and doubt. The waters off western Cuba hold stories even beyond mythology. This region sits at the convergence of powerful geophysical forces. The Caribbean plate grinds slowly against the North American plate, creating deep fractures and sudden drops along the seafloor. Over millions of years, earthquakes and submarine landslides have shaped massive terraces and ridges. In this geological theater, what might appear man-made could also be nature's pattern at its most precise. Yet, some argue that the sharp symmetry seen in the sonar images transcends natural coincidence, that it carries too much deliberate geometry to ignore. Maritime archaeologists know how deceptive the ocean can be. At certain depths, volcanic processes can mimic architectural order. Lava flow meeting compact limestone can fracture into right angles, creating the illusion of constructed blocks. But the Cuban formations extend beyond isolated instances. They seem to suggest an entire layout, a network of alignment stretching over an improbable distance. To many, this scale implies planning, orientation, and purpose. And so the debate continues, poised delicately between science and longing. The idea of a pre-flood civilization, one advanced enough to construct monumental architecture long before Sumer or Egypt, is both thrilling and unsettling. It challenges the timeline of human progress. If the Cuban ruins are real, they belong to a world unrecognized by history, a world capable of mathematics, engineering, and design at a time we still call pre-human or primitive. Such implications stretch beyond archaeology into philosophy. They suggest that human civilization may be far older than we accept, its memory shattered and submerged beneath the tides of time. As storms sweep over the Caribbean each year, the waves churn above this possible city but never disturb it. Beneath the surface, pressure preserves the secret perfectly, as though the sea guards it against revelation. It is humbling to imagine that while we sail, swim, or fish above, beneath us might rest the homes, temples, and streets of people for whom the stars held different names. Historical parallels appear across the globe. Off the coast of Japan lies the Yonaguni Monument, another underwater structure of astonishing geometry, whose origins remain disputed. In the Mediterranean, ruins off the coast of Greece and Malta hint at civilizations lost to floodwaters. In India's Gulf of Cambay, sonar has mapped urban grids buried under silt, older than the known Indus Valley cities. Everywhere the ocean keeps its silent archives, teasing us with glimpses of forgotten ages. Beneath Cuba, perhaps, lies a fragment of that same network of lost worlds. The idea of these submerged cities resonates deeply with those who believe human history is cyclical, that advanced societies rise and vanish, leaving behind relics that future generations mistake for myth. The pyramids under Cuba, if real, may be the grandparents of all the stone temples that followed, echoes of the original architecture of humanity. Others dismiss such ideas as romantic fantasy, explaining the formations as natural cliffs eroded by currents. Yet even they admit, the ocean floor has fooled experts before. It is capable of both sculpting and concealing, creating shapes that challenge imagination. Exploration of the site faces impossible obstacles. The depth of 2,000 feet excludes human divers entirely. Robotic submersibles can film and collect samples, but pressure at that level crushes metal and distorts vision. Visibility is limited, and sediment clouds the water, rendering images blurry and spectral. Still, each expedition returns with just enough clarity to ignite new speculation without providing closure. Each journey confirms that something extraordinary lies there, even if its precise nature eludes definition. The Cuban authorities, joined by international researchers, once considered launching a full-scale geological and archaeological study. Funding, however, faltered as debates arose between government interests, private sponsors, and academic skeptics. The ocean remains patient. The stones wait, unmoved by bureaucracy or disbelief. Above them, generations of ships have passed without knowing that under their paths, lines of ancient design might rest intact. Even in their uncertainty, such discoveries inspire a kind of poetic unease. They invite us to reflect on the fragility of memory, on how entire civilizations can vanish, leaving behind no word, no artifact, only stone sleeping under water. The ocean, endless and impartial, is the keeper of our beginnings and our ends. It erases equally and preserves selectively, allowing only fragments to escape its silence. Perhaps that is why we return again and again to the mystery beneath Cuba, because what we are really searching for is evidence that we have been here before, that humanity's journey is older and wider than our records allow. Some speculate that if the structures are indeed man-made, they might correspond to an ancient shoreline civilization connected with early traces found throughout the Americas. The patterns of migration, the distribution of early tools, and the shared myths of a flood among Mesoamerican cultures all weave a faint thread toward this possibility. Perhaps, before the continents were divided by rising waters, people traveled freely across lands now drowned, building settlements along coastlines that today lie at the bottom of seas. The sonar maps reveal something curious. The formations align almost perfectly along a northeast-southwest axis, similar to alignments used in ancient astronomy. If intentional, this orientation could have mirrored celestial paths, tracking the solstice or the journey of constellations. Such precision, whether coincidental or designed, hints that the builders, if there were builders, understood the marriage between earth and sky, between time and structure. Each new sonar scan, each improved mapping technique, unravels more of the shape yet still denies a final answer. Engineers dream of future technology capable of descending deeper and staying longer, bringing back detailed imagery of the site. Until then, the Cuban underwater formations remain one of the most compelling and least understood anomalies on Earth. The world beneath those waves whispers softly in frequencies lower than hearing, reminding us that our past may be more vast, more complex, and more mysterious than we have ever dared to believe. Even at night, when the sea is calm and no lights glimmer but the stars above, one can imagine the silhouettes of those pyramids far below, surrounded by endless water. They stand unshaken by time, monuments to mystery, indifferent to our interpretations. Somewhere in that silence lies a truth, whether geological or human, that binds us to the deep origins of our planet. And in contemplating that truth, we descend too, not through water, but through wonder, into the slow heartbeat of the earth itself. The sea, in its unending motion, erases and remembers with equal patience. It takes centuries to bury a continent, yet a single wave can uncover the bones of forgotten empires. As dawn breaks over the Caribbean, the light glides across the water in long, fluid ribbons, each shimmer a metaphor for time itself, folding, reflecting, vanishing. Beneath that glossy stillness waits the drowned geometry of Cuba, unchanged by the turning of the world above, unchanged by history's revisions. To imagine Atlantis rising in this place is not simply to indulge fantasy, it is to stand on the edge where myth and evidence touch. The Greek philosopher Plato spoke of a vast island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a civilization advanced in science and art, utterly destroyed by the sea in a single night. For centuries, scholars sought the site across oceans and continents. Yet, what if the echoes of that tale reached farther than Europe's edge, carried across generations by migrating peoples until it took root in the collective memory? If the Cuban formations do represent the remains of an ancient city, their position fits uncannily with the coordinates Plato hinted at, an island nation lost beneath the Western Ocean, near where the Atlantic greets the Caribbean. The idea unsettles those who cling to linear progress. Our accepted history tells us civilization began modestly small villages, then city-states, then empires. But if evidence of grand architecture lies 2,000 feet below the Caribbean, that narrative collapses, replaced by cyclical memory, a rhythm of rise, destruction, and rebirth. Every civilization might only be remembering fragments of its predecessor. The pyramids of Egypt could be echoes of earlier towers swallowed by the sea, their blueprints dreamt again by descendants who did not realize they were rebuilding what once existed long before. In ancient lore, Atlantis was punished for arrogance. The gods sent earthquakes, fire, and finally floods to erase it from the earth. It became a moral lesson disguised as a historical event, that hubris invites destruction. Yet beneath that allegory may linger truth. Geological evidence shows immense flooding around 10,000 BC. The very period when Plato claimed Atlantis sank. Melting glacier unleashed torrents that redefined maps, drowned islands, and sank coastal plains. The Caribbean, then, was not as we know it today. It might have been a vast archipelago with thriving lowlands now hidden below 2,000 feet of seawater. If one drifts quietly along Cuba's western coast at night, when the sea is without wind, it is possible to sense the immense weight of what lies beneath. The pulse of oceanic currents hums through the hull like an ancient language. Instruments pick up faint magnetic irregularities, natural perhaps, yet strangely rhythmic, like the pulse of architecture asleep in darkness. The crew of any vessel that dares to listen too long begins to feel the thin veil separating the known world from the lost one below. It is easy, in those moments, to understand why sailors once feared these waters as haunted. Stories abound in coastal villages, whispered in the quiet hours before dawn. Fishermen speak of lights under the surface, of shadows shaped like spires, of echoes that rise from the depths after storms. While science dismisses such accounts as illusion or sonar interference, there is something persistently human about the way these stories survive, passed down from those who live by the sea and sense something greater than themselves beneath it. The mystery of Cuba's underwater city is not merely about stone, it is about memory, ancestral and collective. Across the Caribbean basin, ruins and artifacts discovered on nearby islands show surprising correlations. Carved stones bearing patterns similar to those found in ancient Central America, remnants of maritime cultures that existed far earlier than historians once believed possible. Could these scattered fragments be the remains of a once-connected civilization, a maritime network stretching across what is now the Gulf of Mexico, the Bahamas, and the Yucatan Shelf? The question lingers like suspended sediment, never settling into certainty. Some researchers suggest the alignment of submerged structures points towards celestial significance. Their axes may mirror the constellations visible around 12,000 years ago, during the pre-dawn of known civilization. If true, it means whoever built this city possessed astronomical knowledge surpassing what we attribute to early humanity. The orientation of its stones could mark equinoxes, solstices, or even catastrophic cosmic events remembered as floods. Perhaps the builders sought to preserve harmony between sky and sea, a harmony later broken by nature's upheaval. When one studies the sonar maps long enough, a strange feeling arises. It is not only the lost city that is being observed, but something older observing us in return. The patterns, so precisely geometric, feel purposeful, as if designed to outlast their makers. Each massive block, each step-like ridge, seems to whisper that time does not destroy, it merely conceals. What we call discovery may only be the resurfacing of memory long submerged. In that sense, the ocean becomes an archive, and the Cuban structures are a paragraph from humanity's forgotten chapter. The deeper divers descend, the clearer the story seems, until silt rises in clouds and obscures it again, as though the sea grows wary of how much it allows us to learn. Technology inches forward new sonar arrays, deep-sea drones, but each revelation is shadowed by new questions, by the profound realization of how little we understand about our own origins. The myth of Atlantis may never have been one place but many a symbol for all the civilizations erased by rising tides. From the Black Sea to the Caribbean, from the coasts of India to the Pacific shallows, we find parallel legends of great floods, glowing cities, and gods descending from the heavens. The repetition of these tales across continents separated by oceans suggests not coincidence, but memory repeating itself through different tongues. The Cuban ruins, if interpreted through this lens, may be a physical embodiment of that collective myth, one of the many Atlantises that bore witness to the sea's reclamation. At the heart of this mystery lies a philosophical challenge. The more we uncover, the more the boundary between myth and history dissolves. Perhaps they were never separate, perhaps myth was simply history distilled through time, made symbolic because words could not endure as stone could. The discovery beneath Cuba thus becomes more than archaeology, it becomes an invitation to re-evaluate all our stories of beginnings, catastrophes, and rebirths. The Caribbean itself, that vast cradle of turquoise and tempest, is a patchwork of ancient ridges and peaks that once formed mountain ranges above water. Scientists mapping the seafloor have reconstructed what might have been a single large landmass connecting Cuba, the Bahamas, and parts of Central America. If such a superisland existed during the glacial retreat, its inundation would have been sudden and violent, an event capable of dissolving entire societies overnight. Those who survived would have migrated inland, carrying with them fragmentary myths of their sunken homeland. Generations later, those memories would resurface in legends spoken by new cultures, who called it by whatever name their tongue could muster: Atlan, Aztlan, or Atlantis. Floating above those coordinates today is an experience both scientific and spiritual. The sonar device sends down its invisible waves like prayers into the abyss, awaiting an echo. When the signal returns, it brings with it a piece of that hidden world, grainy images etched by sound, revealing pyramids shrouded in eternal darkness. The beauty of these relics lies not just in their scale but in their silence. Their message endures not through writing, but through form, a geometry too perfect to be accidental, too mysterious to be fully understood. Historians often dismiss speculation about pre-flood civilizations as pseudoscience. Yet even the strictest method cannot deny the persistence of unexplained artifacts, calendar stones, or architectural marvels that appear too advanced for their suggested age. The line between recorded and lost humanity is paper-thin, blurred by the unpredictability of nature and the brevity of memory. If the Cuban site teaches anything, it is the humility to accept that we may not be the first epoch to rise so high, nor the first to fall so low. Imagine for a moment what life in that forgotten city might have been. Broad avenues lined with stone, markets by the shore where the sea once brushed softly against docks now buried beneath pressure and dark. Children laughing among the courtyards, scholars studying the stars from towering steps, priests whispering to the tides. The ocean that sustained them would one day consume them. The night before the great flood, perhaps the horizon glowed crimson, a warning misunderstood. The earth trembled, the waters rose, and by dawn, the city that once stood against the sky lay beneath it. Centuries passed. Coral embraced the fallen walls, turning temples into reefs, pyramids into mountains of living color. Schools of fish weave through windows that once belonged to citizens of a vanished era. Nature did not destroy, it transformed. The city adapted into a new ecosystem, its geometry softened by moss and coral, yet still visible in sonar traces, a bridge between eras, human creativity now part of nature's domain. Above this grave of stone and coral, the modern world moves restlessly forward, tethered to progress but haunted by what it cannot explain. Scientists debate, dreamers listen. The sea pays no attention, continuing its slow pulse, its long remembering. Late at night, one can almost imagine that deep below, the city glows softly in the dark, pulsing to the rhythm of the Earth's ancient memory. Each sonar echo, each expedition, is not merely a quest for knowledge, it is an act of communion, a silent dialogue between our present and a forgotten past that refuses to die. In every submerged stone, there is a whisper of continuity. The same hands that once shaped those blocks may have passed down their knowledge through generations, eventually building the wonders we still see on land. Civilization, then, is not a straight path, but a spiral descending into the depths and rising again, carrying pieces of the same light through every cycle. The city beneath Cuba is part of that spiral, a reminder that what we lose may one day return, reassembled in different forms, reimagined but not erased. And so the mystery endures, luminous beneath the dark. Whether natural or built by forgotten minds, the formations stand as mirrors to our own search for meaning. They draw us downward, into the tranquil unknown, into the place where history becomes myth and myth becomes history again. The sea keeps its secret, but in that secrecy lies beauty, an invitation not to possess the truth, but to listen, to dream, to remember. Night descends over the Caribbean with the gentle precision of silk falling onto stone. The wind quiets, and the ocean stretches into an endless plain of dark glass. Somewhere beneath that silence, far below the shimmer of moonlight, the ancient city of the deep rests untouched. The sonar pulses continue their slow rhythm through the abyss like a heartbeat echoing across eternity. Each wave of sound traces the hidden stones, revealing a city without breath but not without story. The instruments hum softly, translating the contours of a buried world, while those who listen aboard the ship find themselves hushed by awe rather than fatigue. When scientists return to their laboratories with the data, the images flicker across computer screens in ghostly repetition, pyramids, lines, walls that defy denial. Experts gather in dimly lit rooms, debating loudly but feeling, beneath each rational phrase, the pull of something inexplicable. Some insist that these shapes are illusions of light and sound, coincidental configurations of rock that mimic order where none exists. Others see too much pattern to surrender to coincidence, too much geometry for chaos to claim. Back and forth the arguments unfold until the room feels smaller than before, as though the sea itself has entered, listening to its secrets being dissected. A few brave researchers push beyond skepticism to curiosity. They imagine how powerful floods or quakes might have overwhelmed ancient cities, how entire landmasses could have crumbled under shifting plates thousands of years ago. Mapping the seafloor, they trace fault lines bending through the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean basin, each fracture a potential scar from cataclysms long forgotten. If land once existed above those depths, then the ruins beneath are exactly where they should be, pressed against history's most silent boundary, suspended between memory and oblivion. The expeditions continue, though progress is slow. Funding arrives in bursts, sometimes through universities, sometimes through private curiosity disguised as science. Each new voyage sends remotely operated vehicles deeper than before, fitted with lights bright enough to pierce the blackness like blades. Cameras drift above the formations, catching glimpses of sharp edges masked by coral growth. The video feeds shimmer with floating particles, silt, plankton, fragments of time, making the structures appear to rise and fall in motion. It is impossible to tell whether one is watching a stone or an illusion sculpted by light and depth. The operators narrate in low voices, careful to keep the calm. They describe steps carved from stone, ledges where light refracts in perfect squares, corridors half hidden beneath tangled vegetation. Each feature feels both tangible and uncertain, as if reality itself hesitates to reveal what it holds. The robot's mechanical arms reach toward a surface, brushing a wall encrusted in pink coral, scraping loose a fragment of gray stone, smooth, precise, unnervingly artificial. The fragment, rising to the surface hours later, holds a texture not common to local geology. It feels foreign, like something born of deliberate craft. In conference halls, this discovery ignites restless debate once more. Geologists claim the composition could result from volcanic compression, archaeologists note inconsistencies in natural formation. The media amplifies the mystery, and soon the city beneath Cuba captures imagination across continents. As journalists broadcast theories and artists render what might be, the ocean remains indifferent, holding its truths beyond their reach. Fame ebbs quickly, but the fascination endures. Those who once glimpsed the sonar data never forget the feeling, the sense that, however vast human knowledge may become, the Earth will always contain something older than certainty itself. Late one night on the research vessel, a senior oceanographer walks to the bow and looks out into the dark. The horizon sways softly, unbroken but infinite. He recalls that nearly 70% of the planet lies beneath water, unseen, unexplored. What we know of the ocean floor is less complete than our maps of the moon. With that realization comes humility and acceptance that perhaps history, too, lies submerged beyond measurement, glimpsed only in brief bursts of discovery before sinking again into mystery. The currents passing over Cuba's western coast flow with remarkable precision, guided by ancient valleys carved before the last ice retreat. To follow these undersea valleys is to travel backward in time. The sediment collected along their ribs contains fossils of plants and animals once native to dry terrain. That evidence suggests these submerged areas were not always ocean. They were land, forest, plain, home. What cities might have existed there before the floodwaters rose can only be imagined, but imagination is sometimes the first step toward revelation. The thought of a metropolis standing where now only fish swim feels almost impossible, yet the physics of the Earth supports such transitions. A sudden rise of temperature, a shift in axial tilt, or the melting of ice sheets could drown entire nations faster than they could adapt. We are witnessing it again today in slow measure, coastlines creeping backward, land shrinking beneath climate's unrelenting tide. Perhaps what we fear most in the idea of a lost civilization is the reflection of our own fragility, the proof that progress guarantees nothing in the face of nature's quiet power. Contemporary historians who entertain the possibility of pre-flood societies often find themselves at odds with academia. Yet across cultures and timelines, certain symbols persist: the flood, the sunken temple, the survivors who rebuild inland. Myths from Sumeria, Egypt, and Mesoamerica sing the same refrain with different voices. In the Aztec tradition, there was Aztlan, the place of origin beyond the sea, now lost. In the Hebrew scriptures, the flood cleansed the earth and began anew. And in the memory of the ancient Caribbean peoples, there were spirits beneath the waves, guardians of lands that once lay above water. These collective memories do not fade, they merge into the rhythm of existence, persistent as the tide itself. Beneath all these parallel tales lies a human desire to understand what was lost. To see the Cuban megaliths through this lens is to recognize not merely ruins, but continuity, the fragments of global memory resurfacing through stone. The sonar imagery becomes a dialogue between present and past, each echo speaking in two languages, one of mathematics, one of myth. We measure distances and depths, yet the heart measures awe. For every angle confirmed, there is an emotion neither data nor logic can explain. It is as though the stones themselves speak softly to the curious, urging them to remember. More expeditions follow, armed with advanced multibeam mapping systems capable of crafting vivid topographies in digital light. The images show terraces arranged with startling precision, layers of step-like formation stacked neatly as if designed to guide water or ritual. No definitive proof emerges, yet no disproof either. The mystery remains perfectly balanced, drawing explorers like moths to a flame they know they cannot touch. Beneath the calm surface of the Caribbean drifts an entire geography of unanswered questions. Some scientists compare these formations to natural examples elsewhere: basalt formations shaped by cooling lava, sedimentary shelves arranged by erosion. But others point to details those patterns lack: the repetition of proportional ratios, the alignment of edges mirroring 90-degree angles. Too much mathematics, too much design. Their argument is not one of faith, but of geometry. Nature, though artistic, rarely adheres to the precision of the engineer's hand. A few researchers, quietly and carefully, begin to build models of what that city might have been: its plazas, temples, and roads reconstructed digitally, projected above the water in ghostly holograms. These virtual recreations draw the viewer into a world before the deluge. Streets lined with pillars rise from the seabed, reconstructed from sonar grids. Rivers, once blue and free, thread between white stone colonnades. A city of symmetry and silence stands illuminated in simulation, breathing again in the minds of those who long to believe. The recreations do not claim proof, they offer wonder, and perhaps that is enough. For in wonder lies the power to preserve curiosity, and curiosity is the first language of knowledge. Years pass, and technology grows stronger. Sonar becomes sharper, remote drones learn to dive deeper and stay longer. The images gain clarity, but the mystery does not shrink. It expands. The more we see, the more we understand how little can be known. Each new picture reveals more complexity: stratified walls, rectangular courtyards, circular depressions at equal distances apart. Each line, measured and mapped, seems almost to argue for intelligence. Yet each skeptic reminds us nature mimics art often and entirely. In recent seasons, divers using autonomous submersibles have recorded acoustic reverberations on the seabed that suggest hollow chambers beneath solid stone. The patterns seem too structured to be random variants. Perhaps these are collapsed vaults, or pockets left by trapped air during submersion. Perhaps. The data is inconclusive, but imagination runs freely. Wonder itself becomes a scientific instrument. Even when the evidence refuses to declare an answer, humanity listens still, for truth sometimes moves not in revelation but in rhythm. And always, above those depths, the sea remains beautiful, untouched by the clamor of debate. The surface glows with tropical warmth, hiding the cold histories beneath. Waves lap gently against the hulls of ships, each crest a brief reflection of the stars. 1,000 feet beneath, darkness reigns absolute, illuminated only by the artificial eyes of machines searching for meaning. Somewhere down there, stone meets coral, coral meets silence, and silence breathes memory. When night deepens enough, the boundary between surface and depth seems to dissolve. Those who remain awake on deck feel that the ship itself floats upon layers of time, not just water. The wind speaks softly across the bow, carrying whispers older than humanity's vain attempts to measure existence. There is peace in not knowing, yet also the ache of possibility, the delicate unbearable thought that something extraordinary lies just beyond our grasp. The sonar pulses continue their patient dialogue below, indifferent to emotion but resonant with purpose. The ocean, vast and endlessly untranslatable, does not reveal easily. It asks for surrender. To listen to it is to accept that understanding may come not through answers but through awareness. The city beneath Cuba may never be proven or disproven. It may remain forever poised between the tangible and the imagined, a myth dressed in geological certainty. But perhaps that is its greatest gift, to remind humanity that some secrets are sacred not because they hide the truth, but because they teach us to keep searching. It is said that wisdom begins when words end, when data gives way to silence, and the heart begins to see. Beneath the Caribbean, silence rules utterly. If one could descend far enough, one might feel that silence, like gravity itself, heavy, eternal, complete. And in that hush, where ages collapse into an endless present, one might hear the faintest echo of the past breathing still, waiting for someone, someday, to listen without demanding certainty. The night was heavy and still over the Caribbean, the stars vast above, their reflections trembling along the endless plains of black water. The ship floated quietly in that immense calm, yet the people aboard felt something alive beneath them. Not movement exactly, but presence, like being adrift above the memories of another age. Sonar murmured below deck, rhythmic and soft, each pulse a reminder that the sea's secrets were still responding, still whispering from 2,000 feet under. The team gathered to listen, not because they expected answers, but because the act of listening itself had become a kind of devotion. No one truly slept on such nights. The oscillating hum of instruments seemed to merge with the sound of blood in the ear, until the boundary between human and ocean grew faint. Outside, beyond the reach of the floodlights, lay a horizon without edges. Light bled into darkness, darkness folded into silence. The captain, an older man who had spent decades on the water, stood at the bow, his eyes far away. He had seen storms big enough to tear apart steel, but nothing haunted him like the thought of stone breathing under the sea. He whispered that places remember us, even when we forget them. Morning came slow, a thin line of rose along the sky. The scientists unpacked their new equipment, preparing the next descent. The sea glittered innocently, its surface pretending simplicity while hiding labyrinths below. As the submersible slipped beneath the waves, cameras blinked awake, catching frames of swirling blue giving way to rippling black. Down the remote craft fell, into the world where color dies and silence deepens, toward the coordinates that humans could hardly imagine, let alone reach with their own bodies. Every meter downward was another step across centuries. On their screens, the first outlines appeared. The light from the submersible swung gently, illuminating chunks of coral, pillars of rock, and then a corner, a perfect edge incongruous among the chaos of nature. The pilot steadied the craft, hovering in front of what looked like a staircase rising up from the abyss. Its steps were broad, blanketed in algae, smooth as if shaped by hand. They rose toward nothingness, the top swallowed in clouds of swirling sediment. It could be nature, yes. But it could also be something far older than the world we recognize. The team sat in the dim control room above, staring at the images, breathing shallow. No one spoke for a long while. The data would need to be analyzed, cross-checked, verified by countless calculations. Yet in that moment, the intellectual part of their minds fell away. What remained was a shared stillness, the instinctive awe of recognizing form in the void. Patterns again, recurring like an insistent echo, straight angles, precise layers, corridors extending into darkness as if they belonged to some greater structure hidden from sight. The ocean doesn't build in blueprints, one researcher whispered. Someone once did. As the day passed, clouds rolled across the sunlight, and a soft rain began to fall. Drops struck the deck like faint percussion, merging with the rhythmic beating of sonar. The captain recorded coordinates while others adjusted instruments, trying to recreate the shape in full 3D modeling. Digital reconstruction built slowly, line by line, until a ghostly map took form. It wasn't perfect, but it suggested something vast, a web of terraces, an arc descending into the darker trenches, and beyond it a plateau seemingly encircled by symmetrical mounds. These might have been landmarks, or natural layers, but the geometry was persuasive. Even under scrutiny, it refused to dissolve into chaos. Back on land, the news spread again. Theories multiplied faster than they could be contained: lost civilizations, alien architects, survivors of forgotten ages. Each idea leapt from rational speculation into poetic obsession, because that is the trajectory mystery always takes. People need their myths. The world, rational and tired, secretly longs for wonder. Academics argued, dismissing now familiar images as anomalies. Yet everywhere else, from lecture halls to quiet bedrooms late at night, people stared at the pictures and saw possibility breathing in them. Underwater archaeology became a mirror of philosophy as much as science. What does it mean, the scientists asked one another, when geometry emerges from chaos? When structure insists on being seen within nature's randomness? Maybe the ruins weren't ruins at all, maybe they were memories of how humans long to find meaning. Or maybe they were proof that meaning existed before we were ready to recognize it. Each hypothesis yielded both discovery and self-reflection. Beneath every measurement lay the same essential question: what if history is deeper than the timeline we drew for it? Far beneath the ocean's skin, the submersible continued its exploration days later. A mechanical arm brushed against what appeared to be a carved groove, smooth and deliberate. The cameras adjusted focus, measuring dimensional consistency. The grooves curved outward like decorative inscriptions, or perhaps were simply erosion sculpted beautifully by current. When the lights passed over again, they caught glimmers of mineral deposits resembling gold filaments, ancient chemical traces trapped by time. No treasure, but beauty nonetheless. The footage returned to the surface carried a dreamlike quality. The longer one stared, the more the mind projected images upon it: arches, streets, low walls. Some laughed at their own interpretations, accusing fatigue of conjuring cities out of shadows. Others fell quiet, unwilling to reduce their awe to hallucination. The boundary between imagination and perception, so often clear, collapsed here as easily as sand beneath a wave. To observe the depths was to realize how vision can be both revelation and illusion at once. Meanwhile, in universities and institutes far away, the debate raged hotter. Geological committees demanded repeat data sets to exclude sonar aberration. Oceanographers countered with records showing unusual regularity. Philosopher-historians joined in, drawing parallels between the Cuban structures and lost cities described in distant traditions. Even theologians found subtle symmetry between myth and image, citing ancient texts that spoke of seas reclaiming man's pride. In every corner of discourse, the city seemed to reappear differently: scientific puzzle, moral allegory, spiritual mirror. The ocean itself, oblivious to debate, kept breathing slowly through its tides. Storms came, scattering sediment, reshaping the seafloor, hiding and revealing in equal measure. Each observation of the site brought slight variations. A wall that seemed straight one season appeared fractured the next, ridges once distinct grew blurred in sand. Time in the deep moves differently. Memory there is fluid, evidence slips away as easily as it forms. The sea protects its secrets by letting them change shape every moment. Those who had witnessed the formations firsthand carried the memory of them long after returning to land. They described the haunting quality of that underwater silence, where sound exists only within metal hulls and mechanical hearts. Down there, the concept of hour or day dissolves. The pressure feels infinite, even thought seems to slow as though the mind's own pulse must match the rhythm of the abyss. They said that no amount of data renders that experience explainable. To stare into the black and glimpse straight lines among the impossible chaos, it shifts the soul softly, like a tide beneath the ribs. Interest in the site eventually waned from the global stage, as all great mysteries do. The world moved on to new fascinations, distant planets, genetic miracles, digital revolutions. But in certain small circles, the research persisted quietly. Maps were refined. Models improved. Each discovery, while inconclusive, folded more detail into the riddle: consistencies in angle repetition, peculiar layering of sediments, mineral residues uncharacteristic of volcanic formation. The deeper the inquiry went, the wider the questions grew, until they stretched beyond geology into human origins themselves. At night, in dim offices cluttered with oceanic samples and steel instruments, individuals would sometimes find themselves entranced by the sonar topographies. The mind wandered through those submerged avenues, dreaming what it might have been like before it sank. Perhaps the city had been luminous once, temples reflecting sunrise, streets alive with music and trade. People speaking in languages now erased from the record. And when the sea rose to claim them, perhaps they watched the water swallow their monuments quietly, accepting the inevitability all creators must face, that nothing endures unchanged. On other nights, when storms crashed against the shore and thunder rolled across Havana, a few sailors claimed they heard odd sounds rising through the waves, low vibrations, harmonic and regular, like a distant bell tolling beneath the sea. Rationally, such sounds could come from shifting plates or turbulence echoing against seamounts, but they carried a resonance that stirred even the most skeptical heart. For those who had seen the sonar images, it was impossible not to imagine that perhaps, beneath the roar of the storm, the city itself was sighing, breathing once more. Humanity's relationship with mystery is cyclical. Each generation approaches the unknown believing it can solve it, then leaves humbled by its immensity. The city beneath Cuba joins a long lineage of enigmas that challenge our perception not because they defy reason, but because they expose the limits of reason itself. They remind us that history, like the sea, is both infinite and shifting. We map what we can, name what we see, but the essence of things always lies beyond the edges of our measurements. Even so, we continue to explore. Each pulse of sonar, each descent of a submersible, each grain of sand examined under light is part of an ancient ritual, the ritual of curiosity. It is what separates us from the silence we seek to understand. Whether those structures beneath Cuba are nature's masterpiece or humanity's forgotten work, their existence is enough to drive us deeper into the ocean, deeper into ourselves. For in every unanswered question lies an invitation not to despair, but to dream. When the last drone ascended at dawn, dripping salt and shadow, the team watched the horizon flare gold once more. The sea looked innocent again, soft with morning. Yet they all knew that below that tranquil veneer spread a labyrinth of wonder they might never touch. Some secrets are not meant to be revealed, they are meant to endure, to remind us of depth. As the ship turned toward home, every gaze lingered a moment longer on the water, as if hoping the sea would speak. But it only shone back, bright and unreadable, keeping what it knew like a lullaby to eternity. The ocean has a strange way of teaching patience. It reveals nothing in haste, granting knowledge only to those willing to listen longer than they breathe. As the years passed, expeditions to the Cuban abyss grew fewer yet wiser. Technology advanced, instruments grew more sensitive, but so too did the humility of those who pursued the mystery. Every new generation arrived thinking they would solve it once and for all, and every generation left understanding that some mysteries cannot be solved, they can only be respected. The city remained, unseen yet sensed, vast and silent below. Those who had touched the edges of its secrets spoke differently about the sea afterward. No longer did they describe it merely as matter, as measurable water and salt. They spoke of the ocean as if it were conscious, a living archive of the Earth's deepest memories, filled with moods and tempers, memory and grace. Beneath its surface, what appeared to be emptiness pulsed with invisible order. To listen to the sonar echo was to hear time itself vibrating, the voice of epochs slipping through wavelengths. They began to feel that the sea was not hiding its secrets from us out of cruelty, but preserving them until we were ready to understand without greed. Some nights the researchers would sit on deck after transmissions ended. The buzz of equipment softened into the whisper of waves brushing metal. Stars emerged by the thousands, reflected twice in sky and sea. They spoke quietly of things they could not publish, endless impressions, fleeting convictions. One swore that the sonar readings formed patterns that repeated like a fractal, the same design unfolding through scale, a geometry that hinted at both perfection and intention. Another scientist wondered if that repetition was not random but living, evidence of awareness recorded somehow in stone. No one laughed. The air felt sacred in its silence. When they returned home, the land felt shallower, the air louder. Offices and cities hummed with the illusion of permanence. People walked upright, certain of ground beneath their feet, yet the explorers knew that even here, under their streets and houses, water once flowed, continents once cracked, mountains once emerged and disappeared. They could not look at the earth the same way again. It was all temporary, everything a ripple in motion. The lost city beneath Cuba was not an exception, it was a reminder of how transient structure truly is. Every civilization builds toward eternity, but only the sea gets close. As archives of sonar images grew, researchers began compiling data into vast databases. Algorithms traced out patterns that no human eye could quickly decipher. In these endless webs of numbers, certain harmonies began to surface, symmetries suggesting correlation between placements of the Cuban formations and other submarine anomalies across the Atlantic ridge. The digital cartography looked like constellations inverted, as if the ocean had its own mirror sky below, each submerged peak a reflection of a star above. Was it coincidence, or had ancient builders followed celestial maps now forgotten? In quiet moments, some wondered if civilization might have begun where it finally learned to vanish gracefully. To build in stone is one form of permanence, but to build in such a way that even after ruin, pattern remains, that is an art beyond modern reach. The submerged structures, whatever they were, seemed to echo a forgotten aesthetics of survival, one that spoke, even while buried, of proportion and balance. It made scientists feel small, not from insignificance, but from reverence. Humanity, they realized, might be old enough to have forgotten its own beginning. Storm seasons returned, as they always did, scattering projects and slowing expeditions. Hurricanes rolled through the Caribbean like moving mountains of wind. Waves crashed against coasts, the horizon erased in thunder. Yet beneath all the fury, the megaliths endured untouched. 2,000 feet below, storms are nothing but rhythm. Even chaos finds serenity there. It becomes meditation, pressure and time blending until permanence is carved within stillness. Some explorers began to think that the ocean wasn't concealing history at all. Perhaps it was sheltering it. When the storms ended and the sky cleared, new teams arrived to pick up where others had paused. They brought innovations: drones the size of fish, sensors thin as petals, algorithms born from artificial intelligence meant to read patterns unnoticed by human limitation. These machines dove into the depths, pinpointing fragments finer than any camera had ever caught. Bits of texture data, mineral samples, sonar shadows all fed into vast simulations that grew like artificial reefs of possibility. Yet for every new analysis, the question remained the same: are we reading intention into accident, or uncovering intention long mistaken for nature? The ocean answered as always, not with words, but with presence. New readings revealed sections of the supposed city half buried under layers of carbonate sediment, suggesting unfathomable age. The structures seemed both eroded and preserved, edges softened yet shapes intact. This paradox, impossible on land, was routine below. Pressure rewrites material faster than time writes memory. An entire city could melt into the seabed and still hold form, like a ghost refusing to disappear. One geologist called it the persistence of design. That phrase lingered among researchers long after the expedition ended. In global symposiums, the debate reached strange poetic tones. Was it possible, some asked, that what we call civilization is only the visible pulse of an ongoing planetary consciousness, appearing and vanishing through epochs? Just as coral builds and dies, leaving new reefs in its place, perhaps intelligence too arises and dissolves, encoding memory not in text but in the alignment of stone or the symmetry of landscapes. If that were true, then the city under Cuba might not belong to humans at all, it might belong to the earth itself. Such thoughts blurred science and wonder, but no one found it blasphemous. There was something freeing about considering that not everything bright and ordered must serve human authorship. The sea, after all, is a builder too, crafting complexity through repetition. Yet no algorithm within physics could account for the straightness, the sequence, the rhythm of those formations. Even among doubters, respect crept in, quiet but undeniable. One could deny intention, but not majesty. Meanwhile, in the cities of the modern world, people consumed snippets of the mystery through documentaries and late-night radio voices. They heard words like megaliths, ancient pyramid, sunken civilization, and their imagination soared. Most would never dive 2,000 feet, would never feel the weight of that darkness, yet somehow they felt connected to it. It became shared mythology for an era that had forgotten how to dream collectively. Listening to the low hum of narration, people fell asleep wondering who those lost ancestors were, what they worshipped, what hopes they carved into the ocean floor before it swallowed them whole. And in sleep, imagination fused with truth. The dreaming mind is close kin to the ocean. It knows no borders, no fixed light. The story of Cuba's underwater city drifted quietly into those dreams, like a tide infiltrating every shore of consciousness. People awoke with fragments of visions, of grand stairways rising toward a drowned sun, of markets where fish gleamed like coins, of temples glowing beneath coral veils. They told no one, yet the dreams recurred. Memory moves strangely through humanity. Sometimes it speaks through science, sometimes through silence, sometimes through sleep. Years continued. Knowledge expanded in all directions: deep-sea drilling, seismic imaging, AI interpretation. The Cuban site remained untouched yet constant. The more instruments advanced, the more elusive definitive proof became. The data always returned ambiguous, as if the city wished to exist only halfway real enough to inspire, unreal enough to escape possession. The ocean held it there, balanced delicately between evidence and enigma. Those familiar with its coordinates began to think of it not as a place but as a thought the Earth was still thinking. On clear nights back on the water, the team would switch off all lights and listen again to the slow sweep of sonar. When the pulses came back, reflecting from the depths, the echoes filled the cabin like a heartbeat too deep for ears to hold. They realized that their instruments were not exploring the city anymore. The city was exploring them, testing how much mystery their minds could contain before demanding certainty. Humility replaced purpose. Reverence replaced conquest. The youngest of the researchers once asked the oldest, "If we find proof it was built by humans, what changes?" The old man smiled softly and answered, "Everything and nothing. We'll change, but the ocean won't. Mystery will only move somewhere else." That night, under the calm sky, she finally understood what kept people returning. It wasn't discovery, it was participation in an endless conversation. The sea spoke in frequencies below comprehension, and they, with their fragile machines, were attempting to respond. As human understanding evolves, so does its relationship to the unknown. The Cuban ruins became a quiet metaphor whispered in classrooms, not as evidence of Atlantis, but as awareness that the world's past cannot be entirely mapped. Teachers spoke of it as a lesson in patience, of the way truth hides behind boundaries of pressure and darkness. Students stared at the images and felt their own ambitions transformed not toward possession, but toward presence. The deeper they looked, the more they realized that every act of knowledge must also be an act of respect. Years melted together. The sea rose a little higher, as it always does. Cities along human coasts began to feel what ancient ones once felt: the encroachment of water reclaiming its domain. Ironically, while humanity studied the drowned, it was slowly joining them. This realization spread quietly, not as fear but as understanding. Perhaps in 10,000 years, new explorers will dive above modern ruins, tracing our roads with their sonar beams, wondering what we believed, what songs we sang before silence came again. History folds like tides. Our present is merely another layer settling toward tomorrow's ocean floor. Even now, if one sails far west of Cuba and drops a beacon into the depth, it will return the same pattern: a soft pulse, a faint reflection, a suggestion of impossible geometry sleeping beneath the waves. It waits there, not for faith, not for proof, but for attention gentle enough to deserve it. And those who listen, truly listen, will feel that echo not in their ears but in their chest, a vibration that says, "Remember, not everything lost is gone." Some things remain exactly where they are, waiting for the right kind of silence to be heard again. The sea in early dawn looked almost still, though in its depths an empire of movement churned unseen. The water glowed faintly with the reflection of the rising sun, each shimmer a ghost of forgotten light stretching down to meet structures no hand had touched in ages. It was as if the entire ocean had become a mirror for memory itself. The horizon, limitless and unmoving, hinted at everything humanity could never hold. The city beneath, still guarded by the language of silence and pressure, remained a perfect paradox, unchanging, yet always in motion with the tide of imagination that sought it. Those who had studied its shadow spoke of how time dissolved when one thought of it long enough. The coordinates blurred between science and reverie. The longer the sonar murmured through the abyss, the more the data felt like scripture lines of frequency reading like verses from an ancient text the sea had written for itself. None could decipher it completely, but all felt its rhythm. The deep hum rose and fell like breath, a pattern older than civilization, older even than land. Somewhere down there, geometry and eternity touched, and those who listened too closely began to sense that discovery and worship were not different things. Somewhere along that coast, a new generation of explorers gathered again. They had grown up hearing tales of the submerged city, a riddle woven into the fabric of childhood imagination. For them, it was not just history to prove or disprove, but a story that demanded presence. They came not with certainty but with curiosity, carrying machines smaller, faster, and wiser than anything used before. The sea received them with equal indifference, the same soft resistance it had offered all explorers. It would allow a glimpse, but never surrender completely. They sailed during the quietest season, when hurricanes slept and the horizon seemed suspended between one heartbeat and the next. Night stretched endless and star-poured, vast as the questions they carried. Each young researcher took turns at the sonar readings, wondering if the next return pulse would complete the puzzle drawn 2 decades earlier. What if the city's shadow grew clearer now? What if what they found did not change what we know, but all that we believe? Beneath every technical ambition hid a longing no science could measure, the yearning to belong to something much older than the self. When they launched their newest submersible, it descended silently, spinning beams of blue across the black. The light sliced through the abyss until they struck familiar contours. Columns appeared again, rising like frozen smoke. A ridge curved into the shape of a wall, then a stairway, then something too symmetrical to ignore. The sea stirred slightly, scattering the sand that had coated these ancient remnants. For a moment, the vision was pure, crystalline, undeniable, architecture beneath the ocean floor. It felt like trespassing into someone else's dream. The pilot whispered to himself as he guided the machine closer. Every breath echoed in the headphones like thunder. When the submersible reached one of the upright forms, it paused to record texture. The sonar's reflection outlined patterns etched into the surface grooves running parallel in perfect precision. Whether ornamental or geological, they were coherent, rhythmic. It was as if language itself had been pressed into stone and sealed beneath pressure, waiting not for eyes, but for attention. The footage transmitted back to the surface blurred into static when the lights dimmed. The crew above stood in silence, flooded with an emotion that felt both exalted and fearful. One of them said softly, "It's alive." The words hung strange in the air. Alive, the structures weren't living, but they breathed through persistence, defying time, reforming themselves through imagination. In their endurance, they behaved like living organs of the planet, pulsing through history long after their builders were dissolved. When the sub surfaced hours later, the morning sky had turned pale gold. Everyone stood watching as it broke through the waves, heavy with salt and mystery. They retrieved data drives and fragments for analysis, but carried something less tangible, an understanding that the past would never fit neatly into chronology. It exists everywhere, all at once, and every discovery is simply rediscovery. On that deck, no one celebrated. They only listened to the sound of dripping water, echoing faintly like an ancient clock counting ages. Back on land, the recordings were studied again and again. Patterns emerged, mathematical congruences, alignments repeating across unexpected distances. Some compared them to early human settlements, others to natural fractals found in crystalline formations. Yet even in debate, unity grew. Everyone agreed the formations possessed intention, if not human, then cosmic. The data pulsed with something meaningful, something too deliberate to dismiss. The Cuban city had ceased being a single discovery, it was now a reflection of how humanity sees itself against the unknown. In presentation halls, the researchers spoke calmly, but their voices trembled at moments. They displayed 3D maps, slices of terrain laid upon one another. Viewers saw corridors stretching into darkness, chambers curving inward like giant shells, terraces rising in precise gradients. Each piece was uncertain, but when assembled, they formed coherence, a plan hidden within chaos. For a fleeting hour, audience and presenter alike glimpsed what ancient myth had promised, that the boundaries between fact and wonder are only as strict as the mind allows them to be. Long months followed as the global community weighed the evidence. Science demanded replication, so other teams attempted to locate similar formations in nearby trenches. Some found echoes, smaller yet strangely connected, as though fragments of the same civilization had once stretched across the entire basin. If one city lay buried near Cuba, others might sleep further out where sonar had yet to dare. A quiet thrill swept through exploration circles. The ocean, it seemed, still held continents of questions. But there were those who approached the mystery differently, not as scientists, but as philosophers of memory. They wondered if the city beneath the sea was less a place and more a manifestation of collective remembrance. Over generations, humanity had told and retold stories of floods, of lost lands, of arrogance punished and wisdom drowned. Perhaps these stories were not fiction, but encoded recollections carried by our species like genetic memory. If the Cuban ruins were proof of anything, they were proof that the past never really dies, it only changes its form and waits to be recognized again. Others looked inward, seeing in those submerged blocks an allegory for consciousness. The human mind, like the sea, hides its oldest structures below the surface. Beneath thought lies instinct, beneath memory lies origin. The city under Cuba, then, could symbolize the architecture of our psyche, massive, ancient, silent, influencing every motion above. Every sonar map seemed to mirror the mind itself, with its corridors, its repeating patterns, its unlit chambers. Perhaps to truly discover that city was to listen deeper within the self. As public fascination rekindled, artists embraced the theme. Painters filled vast canvases with visions of luminous pyramids beneath blue infinity. Composers wove symphonies inspired by sonar pulses and wave harmonics, music that sounded both alien and familiar. Writers described civilizations who spoke in frequencies, whose monuments were meant to be heard, not seen. Each interpretation became another reflection of the same longing, the same need to feel continuity between humanity and eternity. The sea became muse once again, as it had been since the beginning of language. Late one evening, the young researcher who led the last descent returned to the pier alone. The harbor was empty, moonlight stretching over calm water. She watched the tide and felt an ache that science could never measure. The ocean had shown her too little to call it discovery, yet enough to change her forever. Somewhere deep below that dark surface lay the motionless witness to all time. The city had no name, no date, but it had presence enduring through every human lifetime, like a silent reminder of origins too ancient to categorize. She closed her eyes and imagined the structures not as ruins, but as gardens of stillness. Perhaps no one ever lived there. Perhaps they were built for the sole purpose of being remembered by the sea. Stone knows patience, and the ocean knows eternity. Together they form a contract beyond language. And perhaps humanity's greatest act is not to learn everything but to keep looking, to keep loving mystery for what it is, a mirror through which we see our own impermanence. The waves brushed quietly against the dock, repeating their eternal syllableless song. It was the same sound heard by those who set out centuries ago and by those yet to be born, the unbroken hum of the planet's endless breath. Somewhere under that rhythm pulsed the forgotten city, still out of reach, still perfect in its concealment. Time folded over time, water over stone, silence over truth. And in that layering, existence itself found balance. The story was not about loss anymore. It was about continuity, about the way every ending becomes the beginning of remembering. That night, as ships rocked faintly in their moorings and stars trembled in reflection, the entire sea seemed to breathe once more. Not loudly, not suddenly, but in rhythm with the old deep heart of the world. The Cuban ruins slept on, untouched and unknowable, but within them gleamed the promise of infinite return. They remained, waiting for the next dreamer, the next explorer, the next listener willing to drift long enough beneath consciousness to hear the voice rising from below. Not words, not answers, just the ocean itself, whispering softly, eternally, remember. The night sky had deepened into a vast indigo dome, unbroken by sound, unspoiled by haste. The ocean moved with slow, unseen grace beneath it, each wave a breath in the lungs of time. The research ships that once haunted this part of the sea had long since departed, leaving behind nothing but coordinates, data archives, and the kind of silence that feels like waiting. Yet even in absence, curiosity endured. The Havana coastline shimmered far to the east, and beyond it stretched the invisible paths of storms, migrations, and forgotten histories looping endlessly across centuries. Beneath that chartless immensity, the city still rested patient, unyielding, whole. Years filtered through the world like sand through water. Technology reshaped everything humanity touched. Satellites mapped the sky down to molecules, machines dreamed through algorithms, and digital oceans were explored more often than real ones. But somewhere, still, among those who had once listened to the hum of the abyss, the memory of the Cuban structures persisted. It lived in quiet corners of academia, in archive folders labeled unresolved, in the hands of poets who found metaphors where proofs had failed. And every so often, in a moment of stillness, someone would bring up the question again, could that city be real? New generations, raised on simulations more vivid than life, grew almost skeptical of wonder itself. Yet the sea resisted simulation, it could not be rendered into pixels or replicated in sound. Something in it always escaped translation, something old and alive beyond the frame of human design. That resistance was the reason they returned. The expedition that would follow years later did so not out of certainty, but because imagination demanded it. The ocean had not answered, and silence itself had become too eloquent to ignore. As dawn rose over the Caribbean, the next vessel drifted toward the coordinates recorded decades before. The air was warm, dense with salt and anticipation. New instruments lined the ship's hull, quantum imaging sensors, gravity drift analyzers, machines that could hear vibrations from 1,000 wavelengths deeper than sonar. Yet even with all that precision, the most important tool remained the same: attention, the capacity to listen through mystery without asking it to finish speaking. The sea seemed to sense this patience. For 3 days it remained calm, holding its breath. On the 4th day, results began to emerge. The readings came back not as single echoes but as chords, harmonic sequences of vibration originating from the seabed itself. The patterns repeated, symmetrically, pulsing through the equipment like a faint melody. Some technicians first assumed interference, a resonance caused by machinery. But when the hardware shut off, the sound continued. It was real, though fragile, like music attenuated by miles of memory. The frequencies aligned perfectly with the contours of the ancient structure. The city was singing again, or perhaps it had never stopped. The researchers stood around the displays, transfixed by the rhythmic glow. Some saw data, others saw communication. The mathematical language of the pattern seemed to echo musical ratios found in early human instruments: octaves, fifths, repeating intervals mapped perfectly across frequency ranges. Could this mean that the city had been built not only to endure time but to express it? The idea expanded across the deck like light. If stone could hold symmetry and the ocean could preserve it, then perhaps sound itself was the civilization's legacy: encoded harmonic geometry vibrating forever below the sea. The longer they documented, the more impossible it became to dismiss. Wave after wave returned identical harmonics, resonating through the hull until everyone aboard could feel it in their chest. It was not loud but constant, as if woven into the ocean's very pulse. One by one, the crew fell into a kind of quiet equilibrium, listening without analysis. The sound seemed to erase distance between observer and phenomenon, merging human perception with the rhythm of the deep. For that hour, no one on the ship felt separate from the sea. When the recording finally ceased, an unfamiliar peace settled across the deck. The ocean had given not proof, but presence, a communion rather than confirmation. They replayed the frequencies later on land, and though the melody was faint, it carried an undeniable emotion. Within that vibration, the distinction between machine noise and meaning disappeared, leaving only resonance. The city beneath had found a new way to speak, not through image, but through tone. Months later, when analysis concluded, experts debated again. Some claimed the resonance was caused by tectonic stress or magnetic fluctuation. Others argued it followed mathematical scales impossible to form naturally. The argument swung endlessly, but among the actual listeners there was no need for resolution. They had felt it. The sound had shape, depth, and empathy. The sea was capable of memory, and memory was capable of song. Whether human hands built the city or not no longer mattered. It had become part of the planet's consciousness. Those who experienced it began to change unknowingly. They reported strange peace, clearer dreams, and a growing detachment from everyday noise. One said the sound followed her even when silence filled the room, soft vibrations under the skin, like a lullaby written before birth. Another described sensing tides moving under his thoughts, drawing him toward vast calm. The more they remembered, the less they wanted to analyze, until each adopted the same subtle belief that meaning requires mystery, that proof can sometimes desecrate the sacred. As the news seeped into the wider world, reactions ranged from reverence to doubt. The public, accustomed to immediate answers, struggled with a phenomenon that defied conclusion. There were songs inspired by the recordings, electronic soundscapes echoing deep-sea frequencies. There were documentaries narrated in whispers, as though raising the voice would break the spell. Media outlets called it the pulse of Atlantis, though the researchers themselves avoided the mythic label. But somewhere within history's current, myth and data began to merge easily, flowing like fresh water meeting salt. Meanwhile, the ocean continued its cycles without concern. Coral colonies grew over unseen altars, deep currents shifted skins of sediment across terraces. Light never reached that far, but echoes did, cometary traces of vibration brushing stone. The sea was slow, deliberate, alive. To imagine it thinking was poetic folly, yet standing above it, anyone could feel intelligence in its rhythm. The mystery had become more than a discovery. It was now a relationship, an unspoken exchange between two species of memory, human and oceanic. One dusk, years later, a veteran diver returned to those waters with a small recorder. He was not part of any official mission. He came alone, guided only by longing. As his vessel drifted above the old coordinates, he lowered a single microphone into the deep. For several hours, nothing came. Then, faintly, a vibration reached him, thin like wind through hollow glass. It carried rhythm yet defied tempo, the sound of distance folding in upon itself. As he listened, his heartbeat fell into sync with the pulse. The moment felt infinite. He later said that it was not the sea he heard that night, it was time breathing. When he played the tape back on land, the sound was nearly indistinguishable from silence. Yet those who had once felt that pulse recognized it instantly, like an old friend's voice beneath static. They smiled, realizing that the city had found another listener. The ocean only speaks to those who wait. Its vocabulary is silence, its syntax vibration. And somewhere in that language lies the blueprint of everything: birth, decay, renewal, return. Centuries from now, perhaps, the floor will rise again through geological memory. The water will recede, exposing those perfect stones under the sky once more. New civilizations will walk there, unsure whether they were built by gods or tides. They will listen closely and hear faint harmonies still ringing from within, proof that memory outlives every boundary of matter. By then, our maps will be dust, but the ocean S will remain intact, drawn in sound, etched by gravity, humming quietly in eternity's ear. For now, the Cuban depths continue to hold their secret, unbroken in their calm dominion. The mystery has evolved beyond archaeology and theory, it has become a meditation on existence itself. Somewhere beneath the waves, the city endures not as ruin but as rhythm, a breathing temple composed of water and patience. It is not waiting to be found. It is simply being, fulfilling the only law the universe recognizes, persistence through change. Above it, the winds recover their whispers, the surface glitters indifferent, and the human world continues its restless search for meaning. Yet every so often, in moments between sleep and waking, the faintest tone drifts through the consciousness of those who have heard the deep. It is nothing loud, only a thread of sound woven with memory, calling them back to the sea. It says nothing concrete, promises nothing tangible. And yet, it feels complete. That is the true legacy of the lost city beneath Cuba. Not its potential walls or pyramids, not even its age or origin, but its power to remind us that wonder is a form of survival. That silence, when listened to long enough, becomes song. That time, however vast, is still a story. Beneath the black infinity of water, something endures for no other reason than to be a bridge between all that is known and all we cannot know. The ocean, timeless as memory, keeps singing the same invisible note. Somewhere deep in that endless blue dark, an ancient voice hums beneath centuries of stillness, and for those few who hear it, the world grows quiet enough to feel infinite again. The sea had become tranquil again, the kind of stillness that bends light into glass. Far from the noise of cities, where civilization hums and forgets itself, the water stretched in vast perfection. The surface shimmered with layered reflections of sky and depth, one world touching another through a thin membrane of salt and silence. Below, in the heavy blue dust that sunlight never reaches, the city remained. It did not age, it only existed, immune to the restlessness of what lay above. The weight of water had turned it into a cathedral of time. For generations, the story of the Cuban ruins lived quietly in the spaces between history books, archived data, and reverent whispers. Scholars debated, poets invoked it, dreamers followed the faint calling across the horizon. No one had proven anything, yet no one could let it go. The myth had become something greater than fact, it was a symbol of everything humanity cannot measure but still feels. An emblem of how the unknown refuses to disappear, how silence can preserve what words cannot. In a coastal observatory built decades after the last expedition, one young researcher spent her nights replaying frequencies captured from the deep. The recordings vibrated gently through the lab's walls, too soft to disturb, too strange to stop. She had no memory of the early discoveries, only recordings, fragmented notes, and sonar graphs glowing with mathematical patterns that resembled heartbeat rhythms. And there, through endless repetition, she began to sense the presence her predecessors described, an intelligence that might not have been human, yet no less aware. It pulsed like an unending exhale from beneath the crust of centuries. The sound reminded her of the ocean's oldest truths, that everything living and unliving shares a single frequency. Matter, vibration, memory, they all speak the same language when stripped to their essence. The deeper she listened, the clearer that harmony grew. Those tones were not random, they rose and fell with measurements too precise to be chaos. They followed the ratios of universal resonance, the same used by ancient builders from Egypt to the Andes, the same geometry nature uses in shells, galaxies, the growth of leaves. Whatever lay under the Caribbean had known these truths long before humanity named them. She began to wonder whether the city truly needed to be explained at all. Perhaps its meaning existed beyond understanding, the way a melody transcends theory, the way faith survives logic. The world above demanded evidence, the deep required surrender. To listen without dissecting became her form of devotion. Every night her instruments repeated the same melody, a set of harmonic pulses spaced by silence, as gentle as breathing. The more she listened, the more it filled her like a wordless prayer. Outside, the tide shifted against the breakwaters, endlessly rehearsing their own translation of time. The sea, after all, has no memory of individual tragedies or triumphs. To it, history is merely pattern, rise and fall, erosion and creation. The city beneath had endured not as a relic, but as part of that pattern. It never sought to outlive its era, it simply continued being, folded quietly into the endless cycling of transformation. To the ocean, survival is not resistance, it is acceptance. When the researcher finally arranged a transmission across international observatories, she played the frequencies without attribution. She did not label it as a lost city's echo, nor as natural noise. She called it only origin frequencies. Listeners across continents described the same experience: calm, recollection, a vivid sense of ancient presence. Some wept, some dreamed vividly of water, stairways, and flickering beams of light beneath pressure. No words could describe why, but humans recognized the pulse instinctively. It was as if the ocean's song was older than language, carried through generations in shared resonance. The broadcast spread quietly through digital networks. Within weeks, people used the sounds to meditate, to sleep, to remember. While the world above shifted with wars, politics, and fleeting noise, those tones outlasted the chaos. They became the background hum of modern life, subtle, timeless, grounding. And though few knew where it had come from, the vibrations drew them inward, returning their attention to something vast, patient, and elemental. Without realizing it, humanity was listening again to the deep heart of its own beginning. Meanwhile, far beneath the layered currents, the stones of the lost city remained untouched. Fish moved through corridors where air once passed, coral flowers opened across steps carved in another epoch. No eye witnessed this renewal, yet life thrived quietly, claiming geometry and transforming it into living architecture. The lines between human creation and nature dissolved completely, there was only form, function, continuity. The ocean had resumed stewardship of its inheritance. And perhaps that had been its intention all along. The idea of discovery lost its meaning over time. What mattered was not whether the city was man-made or natural, but what it revealed about perception. The mystery taught humanity to listen differently, to measure meaning not by certainty but by depth. In that sense, the Cuban ruins had accomplished what no artifact on land ever could: they turned knowledge itself into reverence. The city did not want to be solved. It wanted to remind. Centuries later, when sea levels shifted anew and continents redrew their edges, the coordinates of the old site disappeared once more. Maps updated, satellites recalibrated, and the world moved on. Yet deep under layers of sediment and history, resonance still pulsed faintly through water and silt, reverberating up into the bones of the earth. Geologists detecting underground hums often recorded unfamiliar modulations, unaware that they were hearing the same frequencies discovered 100 years earlier. The song persisted, alive within the planet's infrastructure. Even the stars above seemed complicit in this design. Astronomers mapping radio emissions from deep space found harmonics in distant siren bursts identical to those from the Caribbean's ocean floor. Across billions of light-years, the same ratios appeared again: rhythm, pattern, melody. It was as though the universe itself breathed through the same mathematics and unfinished composition spreading across scales of existence. The lost city was not alone. It was part of the great chorus of creation. Across ages, humanity changed again. Cities rose taller, lights grew brighter, but silence never left the edge of consciousness. And in that silence, an inheritance remained: the faint awareness that beneath all progress and decay lies one constant hum, one endless vibration linking water to wind, heartbeats to galaxies. People returned often to these frequencies, not for answers but for remembering. The mystery of Cuba's underwater city faded from headlines and history, yet continued to ripple quietly through culture, influencing art, philosophy, and peace. At last, a philosopher wrote what many had intuited: perhaps we were never meant to find the origin. Perhaps we were meant to become it again. His words echoed what the sea had always whispered: that the unknown is not to be feared, but folded into. For every question unanswered, there is harmony; for every silence, a rhythm. The city beneath the ocean had become the ultimate teacher, not by preaching discovery but by insisting on awe. Beneath all the layers, scientific, mythical, emotional, the truth was simple. The ancient stones were still there. They did not glow or move, they did not hold technological magic. They only persisted, steady in darkness, singing without voice. And maybe that was the final revelation, that endurance itself is divine. That to remain quietly, endlessly, through flood and forgetting is the highest form of wisdom. Above, the ocean began to shimmer with aurora light once again, rare reflections created by the collision of currents and cosmic energy. The sea's surface turned into liquid starlight, each wave a fragment of glass carrying the music of the deep. For a moment, every element, sky, water, memory, moved in unison. No human eye witnessed it, no record preserved it. But existence itself paused, perfectly balanced between silence and sound. Then it continued, as it always would. The tide shifted, the wind returned, and the memory of that harmony dissolved gently into ordinary day. Yet somewhere beneath, the city still breathed within darkness, its voice carrying through endless miles of blue, not a plea, not a secret, but a refrain steady, patient, eternal. Those who dream beside the sea still feel it sometimes, between heartbeats. The sensation is faint but unmistakable, a quiet pulse rising through the body, reminding them that beneath every surface of chaos there is pattern, beneath every fragment there is form. And when they stand at dusk and listen long enough, even the wind seems to echo it, the hum of continuity, the song of what refuses to vanish. The ocean keeps its promises. What it takes, it also preserves. And what it preserves, it teaches slowly, subtly, through rhythm instead of revelation. In that way, the Cuban city became more than myth or memory. It became proof that the universe does not destroy what it loves. It transforms it, hides it, and waits for another listener to find the courage to hear. Even now, the deep still glows invisibly with possibility. Somewhere, 2,000 feet below, time remains circular, folding forever over the same awakening and slumber. The city endures, humming softly, aligned perfectly with the beat of the earth itself. It is still there, untouched by history, unmeasured by distance, keeping eternal watch beneath the currents, a cathedral carved not just from stone, but from the very silence that birthed the world. The sea lay before us like glass, stretched under a horizon that refused to end. Dawn moved across it quietly, painting it with rose and silver hues, while the wind carried the faintest scent of salt and eternity. Those who had studied the Cuban depths said the ocean never looked more alive than when it was perfectly still. It was as if calmness itself had become a form of communication, the water speaking through stillness what language could never articulate. Beneath that mirror of morning, the last mystery remained. The world above had changed in unimaginable ways. Cities gleamed with light even at midnight, and machines whispered calculations faster than thought. Yet despite all that progress, humanity still looked toward the ocean when it sought peace, when it sought origin, when it sought truth. The lost city beneath Cuba had outlasted every question and every generation that dared to descend after it. It remained not a place, but a pulse, a reminder that time's most powerful artifact is silence itself. Many stories had grown around it through the years. Some called it the Song of Creation, others named it the Sleep of Atlantis. A few fishermen swore the sound resurfaced on calm nights, vibrating gently along their hulls. Even children in coastal towns spoke of the hum that lived under the sea, believing it to be the breath of the world. No one argued anymore. Faith and science had stopped competing, they had begun to share the same heartbeat. The sea had taught one final truth, the truth of continuity. Everything that lives belongs to what came before. The stones beneath Cuba's abyss were no longer simply ruins or monuments. They had become the older version of ourselves, reminders that all civilizations eventually sink, but what we create, feel, or dream never disappears. It only changes form. The city might sleep in water, but its resonance lives in us. Every heartbeat, every ocean wave, is the same story retold with different rhythm. At twilight, when the sun dipped low and the air filled with the colors of fading light, the ocean shimmered like a field of stars inverted. The waves cast small glows where plankton gathered, and for an instant, the sea and sky exchanged identities, the deep reflecting the heavens flowing downward into the sea. In that merging, one could almost imagine what it must have felt like when the Cuban city was still alive, its towers gleaming under the same ancient light. There, perhaps, people once watched the sunset knowing the ocean would rise to meet them someday. They did not fear it. They built knowing their work would one day drown, and that drowning would be another way of remembering. For every human who gazed into that horizon now, it was not destruction they saw, but transformation. The city below had proved that nothing dies completely, not even memory. It merely changes its dimension, trading air for water, motion for permanence. Now humanity had learned to listen differently. Whenever sonar or instruments played, people no longer demanded answers but waited for resonance. They understood that meaning often hides in repetition, that every pulse from below was not data but dialogue. Our kind had outgrown the curiosity of conquest and grown into the humility of communion. The sea was no longer enemy or enigma, it was ancestor. The younger explorers who came afterward did not descend to claim discovery, they descended to pay respect. Their machines recorded only fragments, but their hearts carried the rest. They spoke softly, aware that every light beam crossing that darkness was an intrusion into a cathedral. And when they surfaced, none spoke for a long time. The silence between them was full of completion. They had seen nothing new, and yet everything had changed within them. The city below had become an oracle carved not from stone, but from patience. Its endurance whispered that civilizations are not lost, they are rearranged. Ground becomes sky. What we call ruin is simply the Earth's form of remembrance. The sea, by keeping the past, teaches the living how to last. It buries to preserve. It silences to protect. It waits so that, one day, understanding arrives without arrogance. On clear nights, when the moon hovers full and luminous above the gulf, the sea glows faintly where the current curves over the deepest trench. To the untrained eye, it is nothing, a shimmer, a trick of reflected light. But to those who know, that glow is more than illusion. It is greeting. It is echo. It is history waving back through liquid glass. The hum beneath still breathes, subtle and eternal. In the great circle of existence, the city's story finally completed itself. It had begun as a myth, then became a discovery, then transcended both. The deeper humanity explored, the more the line between discovery and self-recognition dissolved. For in the end, what we call the unknown is only the memory of what we forgot about ourselves. The city beneath Cuba, the mysterious geometry of its stones, had merely mirrored the architecture of the human soul, complex, submerged, but still shining. When the final expedition closed, no monument was built to commemorate it. None was needed. The sea itself was monument enough. It carried the weight of every dream and failure across time, weaving the echoes of its sunken temples into every wave. The Discovery's legacy lived not in museums or libraries but in understanding subtle, transformative, infinite. So this is where our journey reaches its soft horizon. You, listener, have followed us through the waters, through light and memory, through maps that blurred into silence. You've traveled not only through geography, but through depth, the depth of sea, the depth of mind, the depth of wonder. The city beneath Cuba stands as both question and answer, both beginning and ending. Every tide that touches its stones carries the same message forward, everything returns. I hope, wherever you are listening from tonight, you feel that connection settle quietly inside you. The hum beneath the ocean is the hum within your chest. Each breath you take is borrowed from the same rhythm that moves the tides. You do not stand apart from the mystery, you are part of it. Every vibration, every pulse, every quiet heartbeat joins the choir that stretches from starlight to seafloor. As our story drifts toward its ending, let it stay with you not as knowledge, but as comfort. The unknown is vast because it is generous. It keeps space for wonder, for second chances, for remembering who we were before we learned how to forget. The sea knows this. That is why it never reveals all, that is why mystery endures. So, dear listener, take this moment to exhale. Imagine the deep, the quiet blue swirling endlessly, the invisible city breathing under the waves. Let the sound of water wash through thought and time. Feel your heartbeat fall into step with that ancient pulse. Somewhere down in the abyss, the ocean is dreaming, and tonight, it dreams with you. Thank you for joining this voyage through darkness and light, through the hum of the hidden world. May you find rest in the rhythm of the sea and hear, in each wave, the whisper of origin. Until we meet again, good night, and may the silence carry you safely home.